You ever look around and wonder, when did we all get so obsessed with muscles? Like not just being healthy or fit, but being ripped, shredded, sculpted. It's everywhere now. On red carpets, in movie trailers, all over our social media feeds. And it's not just celebrities or pro athletes anymore. It's your coworker, your neighbor, your cousin's dog trainer. Everyone's lifting, everyone's tracking macros, everyone's trying to look like a Greek statue come to life. But here's what no one really talks about this obsession. It didn't come out of nowhere. It has a history. A strange, sweaty, morally complicated history, filled with circus performers, religious movements, betrayal, stolen credit, and even a woman who lifted her husband like a barbell in front of a live audience. So today on True Crime Echoes, we're not talking about murder or mystery, but we are diving into a story that reveals a lot about human nature power and the quiet pressure to look a certain way. This is the dark, forgotten history of bodybuilding, how muscles went from being freakish to being a billion-dollar cultural obsession. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. Muscle Madness. A Modern Obsession. You know, I've been noticing something kind of strange lately. Or maybe not strange, just surprising. Everywhere I look, it feels like people, especially celebrities, are jacked. And I don't mean fit or in shape, like they go for a jog every morning or cut back on carbs for a red carpet. I mean seriously ripped. Veins popping out of places I didn't even know had veins. Like when did Jim from The Office start looking like a Marvel superhero? And look, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just curious. Because when I think back, even just a couple decades, this whole hyper-muscular look wasn't really the standard. Sure, we had a few action movie stars in the 80s and 90s, your Schwarzeneggers and Stallones, but even then, that level of physique was mostly reserved for guys playing soldiers or cyborgs, not sitcom dads or stand-up comedians. Now it's like, if you're not visibly shredded, are you even trying? And it got me thinking, how did we get here? When did we go from working out to stay healthy to working out so we could look like human statues? When did looking strong become more important than being strong? Because here's the thing, this isn't just a Hollywood trend, it's everywhere. On TikTok, Instagram gym culture, fitness influencers. Even people who never wanted to pick up a dumbbell before are now doing weighted squats like their lives depend on it. And listen, I'm not above it. I've had my fair share of should I start lifting moments too? I mean, the pressure is real. But what if this isn't just about aesthetics? What if there's something deeper going on? Something rooted in history, culture, even power dynamics? So I started digging. And what I found was more than just a story about muscles. It's a story about status, about masculinity, about fear, control, religion, marketing, even war. This obsession with the perfect body didn't just show up one day, it was built brick by sweaty brick over centuries. And like most things that have been normalized, it has a dark, strange, and sometimes surprisingly entertaining history. So today, I want to take you on a journey. We're going to lift the curtain, pun intended, on the strange, sweaty, and seriously complex rise of bodybuilding culture. And by the end of this, maybe we'll all understand a little better why we've become so addicted to biceps bench presses and buffed up Instagram thirst traps. Because trust me, the story doesn't start in a gym. It starts a lot earlier, and a lot weirder. Let's go back, way back, to where the seeds of this obsession were first planted. Chapter 2. The Body Ideal, a Moving Target. You know, one thing I've realized over the years is that the idea of the perfect body is never actually perfect. It's just fashionable, temporary, like a trend. And like all trends, it changes, constantly. Even in my own lifetime, I've seen it shift so many times. I mean, remember the early 2000s, thin was in. And not just healthy thin, but that hyper skinny borderline starved look. It was everywhere on red carpets and magazines, on every billboard you passed. There was this silent competition to see who could disappear into their jeans faster. People were literally having a glass of wine for dinner and calling it a diet. And that was considered glamorous. Then sometime in the 2010s, the pendulum started to swing in the opposite direction. Suddenly, curves were back. Hourglass bodies were the new gold standard. Think big hips, full thighs, tiny waist. And people weren't just chasing it through genetics or workout routines anymore. They were paying for it. Liposuction, fat transfers, BBLs. It became a multi-billion-dollar industry overnight. And now, well, if you've been on social media lately, it kind of feels like things are cycling back to thin again. The heroin chic whispers are creeping back in, and it's just exhausting. There's no winning when the goalpost keeps moving. But here's the thing. It's not just women who've been caught in this game of shifting body ideals. Men have been right there too. Quietly, almost invisibly. The pressure just looks different. While women have been pushed to shrink and soften, men have been pushed to grow broader shoulders, bigger chests, tighter abs, more muscle. And that pressure's been building for a long time. So where did all this start? Well, the truth is, our obsession with the ideal body, especially muscular bodies, goes way, way back. I'm talking ancient Greece back. Around 776 BC, the first Olympic Games were held. And from the very beginning, it wasn't just about winning. It was about display. Competitors trained and sculpted their bodies like living statues. Think of all those Greek sculptures, chiseled abs, ideal proportions, powerful poses. That wasn't just art. It was a message. This is what a man should look like. But somewhere along the line, that obsession faded. As societies evolved, especially in the West, priorities shifted. By the time we hit the Renaissance and then the Enlightenment, intellect started to matter more than muscle. Being smart, educated, refined, that's what was in. You wanted people to know how many languages you spoke, not how many pounds you could lift. Strength of mind became the new flex. In fact, for a long stretch in history, having a muscular body was actually seen as low class. If you were physically strong, it usually meant you worked with your hands. You were a laborer, a worker. And in an increasingly status-obsessed world, that was something to be hidden, not celebrated. So for a few hundred years, muscles just weren't it. But as we know, trends don't die. They go underground. They wait. And in the case of muscles, oh, they were about to make a very loud, very oiled-up comeback. Chapter 3. When muscles became a problem. So after centuries of idolizing the sculpted physiques of ancient Greece, something shifted. And it wasn't just cultural, it was deeply psychological. Muscles for a long time became a problem. I mean, think about this. At one point in history, to be strong was to be less than. It meant you worked, it meant you labored, and that was the last thing the upper class wanted to be associated with. By the 1700s and 1800s, we see this really strange thing happen. The wealthier you were, the softer your hands. Literally. Pale skin, no calluses, layers and layers of clothes. Men wore vests, ruffled shirts, even corsets sometimes. Women were cinched in so tight they could barely breathe. You couldn't even see a man's chest, let alone expect him to have pecs. It was all about polish, refinement, and more than anything, intellect. Your brain became your best feature. Could you read Latin play, the piano quote, philosophy at dinner parties? That's what mattered. That was what made you desirable, respected. Physical labor was considered beneath you, something for the working class, for the peasants. And that mindset ran deep. Even the idea of working on your body for aesthetics was viewed as vain, foolish, even barbaric. Strength training, weightlifting, these things were almost considered embarrassing, for real. Some experts at the time even believed that focusing too much on your physical body could damage your intellect. Like if you spent all your energy at the gym or whatever the 1800s version of a gym was, you were seen as someone who didn't use their brain. The logic was the more muscle you had, the less brain power you must possess. That idea stuck around for hundreds of years. It's wild, right? Because now we celebrate people who seem to have both the brawn and the brains. But back then, having visible muscles was basically a mark of shame. It meant you had to use your body to survive. You weren't a gentleman. You weren't enlightened. You were labor. And it makes me think about how quickly society can flip the script. Like something that was once worshipped Greek god, levels of strength, suddenly becomes something to hide. It's kind of scary, actually, how much our value can be tied to trends and social classes without us even realizing it. Because it wasn't that people suddenly became physically weaker or less capable. It's just that the idea of what was valuable had changed. But here's the thing about human nature. When something gets pushed down long enough, it doesn't disappear. It builds pressure, and eventually it finds a way to break through. And that's exactly what happened. Because right when muscles were at their most culturally irrelevant, a strange underground movement started bubbling up. Something bold, something loud, something a little freakish, and it would change everything. Chapter 4: The Freak Show of Strength. You know how some things don't really die, they just go underground for a while. That's what happened with muscles. Even though polite society was busy sipping tea and quoting poetry, there was this entire subculture forming in the shadows. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't even respected. But it was loud, it was raw, and it was impossible to ignore. Enter the strongmen. These were the early pioneers of physical performance. We're talking late 1800s Victorian era, industrialized cities, gas lamps, corsets, top hats. And in the middle of all that refinement, there were these traveling performers, men with huge arms, wide chests, and a flair for the dramatic. But society didn't see them as athletes, not even as entertainers in the traditional sense. No, they were labeled something else entirely: freaks. Literally. Strongmen were lumped into the same category as bearded ladies, sword swallowers, and people with physical deformities. They were sideshow acts in circuses, carnivals, and dime museums. Their muscles weren't admired. They were gawked at something strange, maybe even grotesque. Their job was to shock, not inspire, and the acts. Oh, they were over the top, bending steel bars, snapping chains, lifting enormous anvils over their heads like they were feather pillows. Sometimes they'd lay flat on their backs and have people stack pianos or even horses on top of them just to prove they could take it. To the audience, it wasn't about form or fitness or even strength. It was about spectacle, a break from reality. Look at that man, people would whisper. Can you believe his arms? It's unnatural. And honestly, that word unnatural says a lot about how the world viewed strength at the time. Muscles, especially excessive ones, were almost taboo. They didn't fit the mold of sophistication or class. They were messy. They were primal. They reminded people of a different kind of power, one that couldn't be tamed by books or etiquette. But here's the thing that gets me. Even though these men were ridiculed, even though they were treated like sideshow curiosities, they were also planting the seeds of a revolution. Slowly, quietly, because no matter how hard society tried to ignore it, strength is compelling. It pulls you in. It makes you wonder what else a body is capable of. And for some people in that crowd, watching those acts, didn't just spark curiosity, it sparked ambition. They didn't want to laugh at the strong man. They wanted to be him. And one of those people would go on to change everything. Chapter 5: The Scientist of Strength. So, imagine this: you're sitting in a crowded theater sometime in the 1800s. The smell of sweat and cigar smoke hangs in the air. A man steps onto the stage, short, stocky, confident. He lays down on the floor, places a wooden platform on his chest, and then someone rolls out a full-sized grand piano. A pianist climbs on top and begins to play. And this man, he doesn't flinch. He just lies there, like he was made of iron. That man was Louis Attila. And while most people came to see the spectacle, what they didn't realize was that they were witnessing something way more important than just a party trick. Because Louis Attila wasn't just a strong man, he was a visionary. He was born in a small German town in 1844, and like a lot of young men at the time, he didn't grow up rich or powerful. But something shifted the day he saw a strongman performance for the first time. While everyone else was clapping and laughing, he felt something else: purpose. That kind of strength didn't scare him. It fascinated him, and he wanted it. So at 19, he packed up, left home, and became an apprentice to an Italian strongman. But Louis wasn't content to just copy routines. He was curious, analytical. He started treating his training like a science experiment. He took notes. He measured progress. He asked why certain moves worked and others didn't. And that's what made him different. See, before Louis Attila, people lifted whatever was nearby: a rock, a barrel, maybe another person. But Louis, he started designing actual equipment, pulley machines, resistance training tools, adjustable dumbbells, things no one had seen before. He basically built the blueprint for the modern gym. Not just a room with heavy stuff, but a space designed for intentional strength. And people noticed. He started getting requests not just from other performers, but from royalty. The Tsar of Russia, the King of Greece, even the King of England. They all wanted to train with him. Suddenly, working out wasn't just for the circus anymore, it was becoming elite. By 1894, Louis opened what was arguably one of the first real gyms in America, and it wasn't just a place to get sweaty, it was a place of strategy, of structure, of transformation. For the first time, someone was treating the human body like a system, something you could optimize. But for all his innovations and success, Louis knew one thing deep down: he would never be the face of this movement. He was short. He was aging. He didn't fit the emerging visual ideal of the perfect man. And no matter how brilliant he was, he couldn't overcome that reality. So, he made a choice. If he couldn't become the symbol, he would create one. And in the late 1880s, while in Brussels, he met a young man, a German, with ridiculous symmetry, broad shoulders, and ambition written all over his face. His name was Eugen Sandow. And in that moment, Louis Attila believed he'd found the one. The protege, the masterpiece. He just didn't know that the same man he trained would one day erase him from history. Chapter 6. The protege who stole the spotlight. There's something both inspiring and deeply unsettling about watching someone you helped rise slowly cut you out of the picture. Not all betrayals are loud. Some are quiet, surgical, calculated. And this one, it changed the course of fitness history. When Louis Attila met Eugen Sandow, he must have thought he struck gold. Eugen wasn't just strong, he looked the part. Broad shoulders, tiny waist, a face that could sell posters, and a body that resembled the Greek statues people used to worship. He was in his early 20s, hungry for attention and already dabbling in strongman acts. But he lacked discipline, refinement, strategy. Louis saw potential, not just in terms of performance, but in legacy. He wanted someone to carry the torch, someone who could become the face of this movement, the thing Louis himself never could be. So Louis took Eugen under his wing. He trained him, sculpted him body and mind. He gave him access to techniques that had taken years to perfect. He taught him how to lift like a professional and perform like a showman, how to command a room, how to make strength beautiful. And Eugen. He was a fast learner, too fast maybe. Because once the applause started rolling in, once audiences began cheering his name instead of his mentors, Eugen didn't look back. He didn't just move on from Louis. He erased him. He started rewriting his own origin story, claiming he was self-made, that the techniques he used were his own, that the training, the routines, even the philosophy behind his body were original. But anyone paying attention knew the truth. Everything Sandow did had Attila's fingerprints on it. The style, the poses, the calculated muscle proportions, Louis had taught him all of it. But now Attila was being left in the shadows, watching as his student became the star of a movement he had spent his life building. And it gets worse. Sandow didn't just take the credit, he built an empire off it. In 1894, the same year, Louis had opened his gym in New York. Eugen published a book, Sandow on Physical Training. It became a sensation, and nearly every page was filled with strategies and methods straight from Louis's playbook. But there was no mention of Attila, not even a footnote, just silence. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was historical. Louis had helped create a legend, and in return, he was buried under it. But to the public, Eugen Sandow was the father of modern bodybuilding. He was charming, photogenic, and smart enough to realize that muscles alone weren't enough, you had to brand them. He sold the image of the perfect man. He posed like ancient sculptures. He oiled his body, performed shirtless, and treated strength as both an art form and a commodity. For the first time, being muscular wasn't just about power, it was about presentation. Sandow was ahead of his time in so many ways. He understood that beauty sells, That performance mattered just as much as physical ability, and he leveraged every ounce of that knowledge to turn himself into a global icon. But the deeper truth, the uncomfortable truth, is that his success came at a cost, a human cost, one that history conveniently forgot. Because behind every great man, there's a story we're not supposed to ask about. And Louis Attila, he became one of those stories. Chapter 7: The Woman Who Outlifted the Legend. Sometimes, history gives us a twist that feels almost cinematic. The kind of full circle moment that no one sees coming, especially not the person who thought they were untouchable. That moment came for Eugen Sandow in 1902, but to get there we have to talk about someone else. Someone whose name you've probably never heard in school, in magazines, or even in most documentaries about bodybuilding. Her name was Katie Brumbach, though the world would later know her by another name, Katie Sandwina. She was born in 1884 into a family of traveling German circus performers, and from the beginning, Katie's life was anything but traditional. While other little girls were playing with dolls, Katie was wrestling her brothers, lifting weights, breaking norms. Her parents were both professional strongmen, and for them, strength wasn't just performance, it was survival. By her teens, Katie was already turning heads. She was powerful, but more than that, she was precise. Her father, probably half proud and half showman, started offering 100 gold marks to any man who could outlift her. No one could. Then came Max Heyman. He was an acrobat who took on the challenge, maybe for publicity, maybe for pride, who knows. But Katie didn't just beat him. She launched him, threw him across the ring like a rag doll, and somehow he fell in love. He married her. And from that day on, he was her biggest cheerleader. Literally and figuratively. She lifted him in her acts, used him as a human prop in comedic skits, and together they toured as this charming, unconventional couple who completely flipped gender expectations on their head. But Katie wasn't just strong for a woman, she was strong, period. So when a major weightlifting competition was announced in New York City in 1902, Katie showed up. Not for show, not for laughs, but to compete. Among the crowd that day, Eugen Sandow. Yes, that Eugen Sandow. And here's where it gets delicious. The competition was structured like a classic elimination. Everyone started at 50 pounds lifting overhead. Then 100, then 150. People dropped out one by one. But Katie, she stayed in. Calm, focused, fierce. Then came 200 pounds, then 250, still in. Finally, the bar was loaded to 300 pounds. Now, this wasn't just heavy, it was symbolic. No woman had ever lifted that in front of a crowd like this. But Katie stepped up, grabbed the bar, and with everything she had, lifted it clean above her head. And then came Sandow's turn. He tried, he strained, he pulled the bar to his chest, but it never went higher. Just like that, the so-called father of modern bodybuilding had been outlifted by a woman. Katie didn't gloat. She didn't scream or demand recognition. Instead, she made a quiet, pointed move. She changed her stage name to Katie Sandwina, a clear play on Sandow's name. A subtle reminder that not only had she matched him, she had surpassed him. And from that moment on, her career took off. She toured with the Ringling Brothers. She bent steel bars, juggled cannonballs, lifted grown men like they were pillows, including, of course, her husband Max, who seemed to love every second of it. Audiences were fascinated. Some were shocked. Others were uncomfortable. A muscular woman that challenged every norm of the time. But Katie didn't care. She didn't apologize. She performed. She thrived. She redefined what power could look like. And maybe what I love most about her story is this. She never set out to tear anyone down. She wasn't trying to make history. She was just being herself, strong, bold, joyful. But in doing that, she knocked one of the most celebrated men in bodybuilding off his pedestal, quietly, completely. Sometimes the best kind of revenge isn't dramatic, it's undeniable. Chapter 8: Muscles, Morality, and the Making of Buff Jesus. It's funny how sometimes the weirdest cultural shifts come from the most unexpected places, like religion. I never thought I'd be saying this, but one of the most influential forces in the history of bodybuilding, didn't come from a gym. It came from the church. Let me explain. In the late 1800s, there was this growing anxiety, especially in Europe and America, that men were becoming soft, literally and figuratively. The Industrial Revolution had moved people out of the fields and into offices. No more manual labor, no more physical strain. Men were sitting at desks wearing suits, reading newspapers, and drinking coffee. And to some people, that was terrifying. Because what did it mean to be a man if you weren't strong anymore? Add to that the fact that women were starting to demand rights, real rights, voting, education, jobs. And suddenly the whole gender structure felt like it was shifting. For some men, that was empowering. For others, it felt like a threat. Enter muscular Christianity. It started in Britain with a man named Charles Kingsley, a clergyman and novelist, who looked around and decided that the men of his time were too weak, too refined, too feminine. He believed that physical strength wasn't just about health, it was about morality, about godliness. To him, a strong body meant a strong soul. If you were tough, disciplined, and physically powerful, you were closer to God. The idea caught on fast, especially among the upper classes who wanted to hold on to their sense of dominance without looking barbaric. And just like that, the church started encouraging sports, gymnastics, wrestling, rowing, even football. Being buff was no longer a sign of low-class labor. It was a symbol of divine masculinity. They weren't just lifting weights. They were lifting for the Lord. It sounds almost absurd now, but the influence was massive. Religious schools started building gyms. Clergy began preaching about the body as a temple in the most literal sense. And organizations like the YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Association, were born out of this exact mindset to help young men become physically, mentally, and spiritually strong. And this is where it gets even weirder, because suddenly even Jesus got a glow up. If you've ever walked into a modern church and noticed that Jesus looks kind of ripped, that's not a coincidence. That image, lean, muscular, sculpted, didn't just evolve on its own. It was crafted, quite literally, to reflect this idea that strength equaled virtue, that even the Son of God should look like he could deadlift a Roman centurion. It became a way to reframe masculinity in a world that was changing fast. As men began to lose their traditional roles, providers, protectors, unquestioned heads of the household, muscular Christianity gave them a new role: warriors for morality, spiritual soldiers, men who could pray and punch. And in some ways that shift helped push fitness out of the circus tent and into the mainstream. It gave muscles a moral makeover. No longer freakish, now righteous. But of course, when something becomes tied to religion, to identity, to national pride, it also becomes harder to question. More rigid, more extreme. The obsession with muscles was no longer about health or even beauty. It was about proving your worth, your morality, your place in the world. And as we'll see, that kind of pressure doesn't go away quietly. Chapter 9. Selling Strength. How muscles became a business. So now we've got this really strange fusion happening: muscles and morality, gymnasiums in churches, a buff version of Jesus hanging on the wall. And all of it somehow made lifting weights respectable. But then came the next step, predictable in some ways, yet still kind of wild when you think about it. Once something becomes respected, it becomes profitable. By the early 1900s, strong bodies weren't just about performance or virtue anymore. They were about branding, and that meant competitions, endorsements, magazines, and eventually a whole economy built around the promise that you too could look like a Greek god. In 1939, the very first Mr. America contest was held. And honestly, it was kind of a turning point. This wasn't a strongman act in a dusty traveling show. It wasn't tied to any church or moral crusade. This was a pageant for muscles. Competitors weren't judged just on what they could lift, but how they looked while doing it. Symmetry, definition, aesthetics. The body itself became the product, and people were into it. Suddenly you had a blueprint. If you could build your body into the ideal male form, you could win trophies, get featured in magazines, maybe even launch a whole career, And that's exactly what happened for a man named Charles Atlas. Now, if you don't know the name, you probably still know the story, or at least the image. Skinny kid at the beach gets sand kicked in his face, bullied, embarrassed, humiliated in front of a girl. So what does he do? He finds Charles Atlas, follows his training program, comes back jacked, and then he kicks the bully's ass. It was cheesy, it was cartoonish, but it worked. Charles Atlas wasn't just selling a body. He was selling revenge, confidence, manhood. His ads were everywhere, comic books, magazines, mail-order catalogs. And they spoke directly to every insecure teenager or struggling young man who'd ever felt small. What's wild is that it wasn't really about health. It wasn't even really about strength. It was about status. Muscles became a solution to social powerlessness. If people don't respect you, build your body. If you're invisible, get visible with biceps. And the genius of it was, you didn't need a gym. Atlas promised you could train at home with dynamic tension, basically flexing against your own body. No weights, no equipment, just willpower. And that made it accessible to anyone. So for the first time, bodybuilding wasn't just for the elite or the eccentric. It was for the masses, for the everyday man who wanted to change how the world saw him. And people responded in droves. More contests followed: Mr. USA, Mr. World, Mr. Galaxy, Mr. Universe, and eventually Mr. Olympia, each one bigger than the last. Flashier, more competitive. The stakes grew. So did the expectations. And slowly the idea of what a normal male body looked like started to shift. This wasn't about being active or healthy anymore. It was about perfection. Immaculate proportion, shredded definition. Muscles were no longer a byproduct of lifestyle. They were the lifestyle. But as we'll see soon, the more we push for the perfect body, the more we commercialize it, idealize it, obsess over it, the harder it becomes to live inside one. Especially if you're a woman. Chapter 10. Strength Denied. When women were told to sit down. You know, for all the talk about strength, discipline, and power, there's something noticeably missing from the early history of bodybuilding. Women. They were there, of course they were. Women have always been strong. Carrying children, working, surviving, protecting, building, but in the world of muscles and metal bars and protein powder, they were told to sit down. To stay quiet. To stay soft. And honestly, that part of the story makes me the angriest. Because as men were out there building gym empires and lifting trophies in shiny briefs, women were being pushed to the sidelines. Literally. For decades, women weren't even allowed to compete in most strength competitions. Not in Olympic weightlifting, not in bodybuilding, not in powerlifting. It wasn't just discouraged, it was prohibited. Because society had already made up its mind about what women were supposed to be: small, delicate, passive, graceful. Not sweaty, not veiny, and definitely not muscular. Even Katie Sanduina, who had outlifted Eugen freaking Sandow, was still treated like a novelty, a sideshow, something amusing. Audiences weren't clapping because they respected her power. They were clapping because they didn't think she was supposed to have it. And that's the thing, when women showed strength, it wasn't empowering, it was threatening. It shook something in the social order. Because if a woman could be strong, if she could lift more than a man, what else might she do? What else might she demand? By the mid-20th century, you started to see cracks forming in the wall. A few bold women stepping up, entering gyms, lifting weights, refusing to play small. But still, the pushback was everywhere. There was this idea that lifting would make women too big, too manly, unfeminine. I remember hearing it myself growing up. You don't want to lift heavy, you'll bulk up. You'll lose your curves, you'll scare men away. And so fitness for women got rebranded. Instead of lifting, we got aerobics, step class, jazzercise, the thigh master, anything that kept us moving but not building. Anything that promised a lean, tight, pretty body, not a powerful one. And look, there's nothing wrong with those workouts. Movement is good, period. But the message underneath it, that was a problem. Because it told us that there was a limit to how strong a woman should be. That it's okay to be fit, but not too fit. That you can be toned, but not ripped. And for God's sake, don't ever be stronger than your boyfriend. But here's what I love about history: it always finds a way to rebel. Even as women were being excluded from the stage, some of them refused to accept the sidelines. They started creating their own competitions, their own communities, quietly at first, then louder, lifting in garages, basements, backyard gyms, until eventually women's bodybuilding became impossible to ignore, and the first time a woman flexed on stage in front of a crowd who wasn't laughing, that was a revolution. Chapter 11: The Weight Room Rebellion. If you walked into a gym in the early 2000s, you could probably predict what you'd see before you even stepped inside. Men in the weight room, women on the treadmills, maybe a Zumba class going on in the background. It wasn't a rule exactly. No one was standing there telling women they couldn't lift weights, but there didn't have to be. The message was already written on the walls in the ads, in the way people stared when a woman picked up a barbell. Strength, real, visible, bar-bending strength, still didn't quite belong to us. And I remember that feeling, that quiet discomfort, when you're the only woman in a room full of iron and testosterone. The way some guys would offer unsolicited advice, or worse, just stare like you didn't belong there, like you were interrupting something sacred. But something shifted, slowly at first, then all at once. And honestly, a huge part of it came from a place no one saw coming: social media. Platforms like Instagram and later TikTok completely changed the game. Suddenly, women didn't need permission to be seen. They could record their lifts, their progress, their struggles, and their victories, and post them for the world to watch. They created their own stage, their own audience, and people responded. Because strength is magnetic, it's undeniable. And when women started showing what they could do, deadlifting twice their body weight, mastering Olympic lifts, doing pull-ups with chains around their waist, it rewrote the narrative. Not through lectures or debates, but through action. Then came CrossFit, and whatever your opinion is on the cult-like intensity of it, there's no denying how much it normalized heavy lifting, especially for women. CrossFit threw out the rule book. It didn't care if you were bulky or too muscular. In fact, it celebrated that. It shifted the focus from how your body looked to what your body could do, and that mindset. It caught fire. Suddenly it was cool to be strong, empowering even. And for a generation of women who grew up being told to shrink, to be small, to stay out of the weight room, it was like waking up from a long collective lie. And now data backs it up. A 2023 survey found that nearly half of women who exercise include some form of strength training in their routine. That number would have been unthinkable just 20 years ago. And yet here we are. It's progress. Imperfect, still evolving, but real. And what's beautiful is that strength is no longer just one thing. It's not just the bodybuilder on stage or the CrossFit athlete flipping tires. It's the mom lifting her kids, the cancer survivor rebuilding her body, the teenager doing deadlifts in her garage because she saw someone just like her do it online. It's not about approval anymore. It's about ownership, because somewhere along the way, women stopped asking for permission to be strong and started giving it to themselves. Chapter 12: From Freak Show to Fitness Culture. What muscles really mean. So here we are. We've gone from ancient Greek statues to circus tents, from Victorian freak shows to religious gyms, and finally to modern fitness influencers flexing on our For You pages. In just a few hundred years, the idea of a strong body has been stretched, warped, polished, and commodified into something that almost feels inescapable. Muscles aren't just muscles anymore. Their meaning, their morality, their currency. And I can't help but ask, what does that say about us? Because at every stage of this story, our obsession with strength was never just about health. It was about control, power, identity, about trying to carve out a space in a world that's constantly shifting under our feet. In ancient Greece, strength was divine, something worth sculpting into stone. In the Enlightenment, it was dismissed as a distraction from the intellect. Then came the strongmen, the outcasts, who turned their bodies into rebellion. Then the churches who sanctified strength when they feared their sons were growing soft. And then the brands, the contests, the marketing machines that packaged power into products sold in gyms and magazines and mail order manuals. For men, it became a way to reclaim dominance in a world that felt like it was slipping away. For women, it became a fight to be seen as more than delicate, more than ornamental. A fight to be allowed to take up space. And today, well, we live in a time where strength is everywhere. It's inspirational, it's aesthetic, it's monetized, it's curated in squares on Instagram, sliced into reels, looped on TikTok. And while some of that is genuinely empowering, some of it still carries that old heavy pressure to be good enough, to be lean enough, to be strong but not too strong, to look like you're in control even if you're not. And that pressure, it hasn't gone anywhere. It's just evolved. It puts on leggings and holds a protein shake. It scrolls through comparison culture with a smile. But here's what I've learned through all of this. Real strength, actual strength, has almost nothing to do with what we see on the outside. It's in the small, quiet moments. The consistency, the comeback, the refusal to disappear when the world tells you to shrink. It's in the woman who walks into a weight room for the first time. In the man who trains because he wants to live longer, not just look better. In the trans lifter, finding power in a body that's finally theirs. In every person who shows up unapologetically and perfectly to do something hard. That's the kind of strength that lasts. That doesn't need a trophy. That doesn't care who's watching. So maybe in the end, the history of bodybuilding isn't just about flexing in front of a mirror or chasing the perfect body. Maybe it's about how far we'll go, how many identities we'll try on to feel strong in a world that constantly tries to make us feel small. And maybe, just maybe, real power begins when we stop trying to prove it. So after everything we've covered, from ancient Greek ideals to buff Jesus from strongmen in freak shows to gym selfies on Instagram, it's pretty clear our obsession with strength was never just about strength. It was about survival, about reclaiming control, about being seen. And along the way, we turned the human body into a battleground. We judged, it worshipped, it starved it, sculpted it, and sold it. And maybe worst of all, we convinced ourselves that if we could just change it, make it bigger, smaller, leaner, tighter, we might finally be good enough. But the truth: you were never meant to fit into anyone else's idea of perfection. You were built to be powerful in your own way. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. If you found today's episode interesting, surprising, or even a little unsettling, go ahead and let me know in the comments. I love reading your thoughts, your stories, your reflections. And if there's a dark chapter of history you want me to dig into, next drop it below. I'm always watching. Until next time, take care of yourself, take care of your body, but more than anything, give yourself grace. You're already stronger than you think.